Guys, for today we're going to look at Mark 1, chapter 1, verses 21 through 28. So, we see in Mark, there's these moments when silence, it feels safer than truth. There's moments when keeping our heads down, it seems wiser than speaking up. Moments when blending in feels more faithful than standing out. I know all of us have had to suffer with this. For many of us, we've learned, consciously or unconsciously, that faith, it should be private, it should be restrained, and it should be polite. We've learned how to worship without disruption, how to believe without inconvenience, and how to follow God without upsetting the order of things, which we know is not correct. We know how to nod at Scripture without letting it press too hard. We know how to pray without expecting interruption, how to leave church unchanged, and how to call it peace, right? But, as we see in the Gospel of Mark, it opens with a Jesus who refuses to stay quiet. He refuses to stay contained, and he refuses to leave things as they are. From the very beginning, Mark presents us with a Christ whose presence destabilizes false peace, and it exposes hidden powers. There's no warm-up period, no easing into the story. Mark simply moves quickly, urgently, almost as though the good news itself cannot afford to wait, right? So, Mark chapter 1, verses 21 through 28. It records the first public teaching of Jesus in Mark's gospel. It's easy to say, well, very bluntly, it's not a gentle introduction. It is not a soft launch. Jesus enters the synagogue, he opens his mouth, and instantly everything changes. So, the big idea of this text is simple, but it's quite unsettling, really. When Jesus speaks with this authority, we see these false powers are exposed, and people cannot remain the same. No, not whatsoever. So Mark writes, they went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. Okay, so on the surface of all this, it sounds ordinary enough, right? So what we know about Capernaum, it was a simple working class town. It's a fishing hub on the Sea of Galilee. No Jerusalem, right? It was not a place of political or religious prestige. It was a place of just daily labor. People working with their hands. People of everyday practical concerns. Now, the synagogue, though, it's the center of community life. It's a place for scripture, for prayer, for teaching. A place of shared identity. But, as we know, Jesus does not begin his ministry in the hall of power or in the courts of Rome. No. He does not start by confronting Caesar or trying to reform the temple system. He begins in a familiar place amongst ordinary, everyday people on an ordinary Sabbath. So, this really matters. Jesus enters into the situation, into the rhythms of everyday religious life. Nothing out of the normal. We see him step into a space that already believes and knows how things work, right? It's done this for centuries now. But everything that happens next, it's anything but ordinary. So Mark tells us they were astounded at his teachings, for he taught them as having one authority and not as the scribes. So this verse deserves to be lingered over. The people, they're not merely interested. They're not politically impressed. They are, quote unquote, astounded, right? Struck, shaken, undone by the way Jesus speaks. Now, the Greek word carries a sense of being overwhelmed, as though the ground beneath them has shifted. That's pretty deep right there. The scribes, though, they're trained professionals, right? They know the law. They had studied under respected teachers. Their authority came from tradition. It's been cited. It's careful repetition. We see over and over that they say, Rabbi so-and-so teaches. Or, according to our fathers. We see that their role was to preserve, was to interpret, and to pass on what had already been said. So, Jesus from the get-go, he does none of that. He does not quote other rabbis. He does not appeal to president. He's not playing that game. He doesn't anchor his teaching and the authority of those who came before him. No, no, no. He speaks as though the truth itself belongs to him. Now, we see that his authority, when he speaks, it's not borrowed. It's simply intrinsic. He does not explain Scripture from the outside. He speaks from within it as though almost, as we know later, he stands at the center of it. So this is where we often misunderstand authority. We tend to associate authority with volume, aggression, or control. We imagine raised voices, clenched fists, or forced compliance. But Jesus' authority it's not loud, but it is weighty. It carries this unmistakable resonance of truth. We see that when Jesus speaks, people recognize that something deeper than information is happening, right? He's not really giving them new ideas, but what he isn't doing is unveiling reality as it truly is. I know that sounds a little off right there. But that right there is precisely what makes the moment dangerous. Mark continues, "Just then there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out." So notice here the timing, right? The unclean spirit does not interrupt the opening hymn. It does not object to the reading of Scripture or the familiar prayers. It reacts to the teaching, okay? So when truth is spoken with authority, we see here that it agitates what has been hidden beneath the surface. The man cries out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us?" So to me, this is a startling confession. We see that the Spirit recognizes Jesus before the congregation does. It knows his name. It knows where he is from. It knows of his power. And most importantly, it clearly knows the threat that he possesses to it. So the question then is not whether Jesus has authority, but what that authority will do. So this moment reveals something kind of uncomfortable. We see that evil is often content to coexist with religion, so long as it is not confronted. Okay? Evil is often content to coexist with religion, so long as it is not confronted. That's scary. That's a truth for all of us. The man is already in the synagogue. He is already part of the worshiping community, right? He's already there. Nothing about the environment has disturbed the unclean spirit until Jesus begins to teach with authority. Okay? So familiar rituals posed no threat. Familiar words were manageable, but a voice that speaks truth without compromise cannot be ignored. So this should make us pause a little bit. It is possible for faith communities to function smoothly while remaining spiritually compromised. It's possible to gather, to sing, to read Scripture, and still harbor forces that oppose God's reign. It is possible for us to mistake order for holiness and quiet for faithfulness. As we see, authority that merely informs does not disrupt. But authority that transforms cannot be domesticated. Here we see Jesus respond with remarkable brevity. It says, "But Jesus rebuked him, saying, 'Be silent and come out of him.'" There's no dialogue. There's no ritual, no spectacle. Jesus does not ask questions or negotiate terms with this evil spirit, right? He doesn't even analyze the demon or explain its origin. He simply commands it. Here, his authority, it's not threatened by resistance. He does not need to raise his voice because his word already carries power. The unclean spirit then convulses the man, right? He cries out with a loud voice and comes out of him. We see liberation in Mark's gospel. It's not tidy. Deliverance is not quiet. When false powers begin to lose their grip, it's often disruption. Bodies shake, voices cry out, and structures tremble. But the disruption is not destruction. Disruption is not destruction, sorry. It is a painful process of freedom. we should not miss the humanity of this moment. The man's not erased or discarded, but he is freed. Here, Jesus' authority, it doesn't crush the man, it restores him. The violence belongs to unclean spirits' resistance, not to Jesus' command. When truth confronts what enslaves us, the struggle can be intense, but the outcome is life. So Mark then concludes, they were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, what is this? A new teaching with authority? He commands even unclean spirits, and they obey him? Now the crowd is left with questions, not conclusions. They do not yet have a full Christology. They don't even fully understand who Jesus is. But they do know this much. His words do things. His teaching is not theoretical. It actually acts. It accomplishes what it declares. So this is where the text turns towards us as modern readers. We today, as modern readers, we're kind of shaped by skepticism, bit by familiarity. We know the story. We know, we've read it many times and have heard it many times. We know that Jesus cast out demons, right? I mean, duh. Kind of a silly thing, I mean, duh. We may even feel a certain distance from the language of unclean spirits, right? Who of us can say for certainty that we have seen them, right? We today now might have names for those. But the question is not whether Jesus had authority then. The question is whether we believe he has authority now. But authority is not simply about power. It is about permission. Who do we allow to speak with final weight into our lives? Who gets to name what is true about us? Many of us are comfortable with Jesus as a teacher, but we're less comfortable with Jesus as a commander. We like his insights, his compassion, heck, his wisdom. But we hesitate when his words begin to challenge our habits, our assumptions, or even our sense of control. We want his comfort without his confrontation. We want his forgiveness without his authority. We want a Jesus who inspires, but does not interrupt. But, yet now, Mark's gospel does not allow us to separate Jesus' teaching from his authority. The same word that heals also exposes. The same voice that forgives, it also names what binds us. When Jesus speaks, he reveals what has been shaping us without our consent. For some, the unclean spirit in the story represents overt evil. It could be addiction, destructive patterns, or forces that clearly oppose God's will. For others, though, it may point to a more subtle power. It could be a fear that masquerades as wisdom, pride that disguises itself as self-reliance. It could even be resentment that hides beneath respectability. We know that these forces are often most at home in places where they go unquestioned. The synagogue, simply put, did not need better organization. It did not need more polished teaching. It had that. It needed authority that could tell the truth. In the same way, the church today does not primarily need louder voices or even trendier strategies or more persuasive techniques. What it needs is the presence of Christ, speaking with authority into our carefully managed lives. This text challenges how we understand disruption. We often equate peace with the absence of conflict. We assume that if things are calm, God must be pleased. But biblical peace is not avoidance, it is wholeness. Sometimes wholeness requires confrontation. Sometimes healing looks like convulsion before the calm. Sometimes the most faithful thing that can happen in a community is that something hidden, it's finally exposed. Jesus' command, be silent. It's not simply a rebuke of a demon. It's a refusal to let false powers define that narrative. Evil does not get to interpret Jesus. Chaos does not get to speak over truth. Authority belongs to the one who speaks life into being. Finally, there, Mark tells us, at once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. But notice what spreads Jesus' fame. It is not marketing. It is not spectacle for spectacle's sake, right? It is authority that is exercised for liberation. People talk about Jesus whose words actually change lives, whose presence confronts what enslaves, and whose authority restores dignity. As we reflect on this text, we have to ask ourselves some hard questions. What happens when Jesus speaks in our midst? Are we merely informed, or are we confronted? Are we comforted? Are we changed? Do we leave impressed, or do we even leave different? The Gospel of Mark begins with a Jesus who will not be quiet. He will not stay contained, and he will not leave oppressive powers unchallenged. Simple as that. That same Jesus, he still speaks today. His authority has not diminished, and his word has not lost its power. The question for us all today, and I hope you sit on it, is to ask whether we are willing to hear him with the seriousness that his authority demands. Because when Jesus speaks, I promise you, things happen. And nothing that truly hears him remains the same. Thank you, guys.